afternoon, everyone. We'll get underway. Welcome again to Eckstein Hall, to the Lubar Center. I'm Mike Goucher, and this is On the Issues. This is our continuing series of conversations with news and policymakers, or people we say are doing interesting and important work in this region and beyond. Today we are joined by Cyrus Farivar. Cyrus is a senior tech policy reporter at Ars Technica, which is a digital publication which focuses on science and technology and politics and does some really interesting reporting in all of those fields. Cyrus is also an author and a radio producer. His first book was called The Internet of Elsewhere, which looked at the impact of the internet on different countries all around the world. He has now written a new book, and the new book is called Habeas Data, Privacy versus Surveillance Tech. This book is so new that it's not even officially out yet, but we will have copies for it.
You guys are the first ones.
Yeah, the first ones. We're going to have, there we go.
I haven't even seen it yet. That's true.
That's actually true.
That's really true. I have not touched the book yet.
So when we go out there, this is a guy who's really going to be excited. But Cyrus will stick around afterwards. If you'd like to buy a copy of Habeas Data, feel free to do it. But we think it's a conversation that is perfect for our times. There's a lot going on. We'll talk a little bit about Mark Zuckerberg's appearance on Capitol Hill later. But we want to get into this by talking about the book with Cyrus. And first of all, thanks so much for
Thank you for having
Milwaukee.
me. Really appreciate
Good to have
it.
you here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I typically ask this of authors who come to town, and I want to get the genesis of this. Why did you decide to write the book Habeas Data?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I have been a reporter at Ars for about 6 years, and in that time I have fallen ever farther down the never-ending privacy rabbit hole. Once you start learning about how some of this technology works and what the legal issues are behind them, you realize that it's just kind of it's really hard to kind of wrap your head around where it goes and how these technologies are used, and they're used in cities like Milwaukee, where I live, in Oakland, California. The FBI, the big scary FBI, and like all kinds of other government agencies are using all kinds of technology, and a lot of us, myself included, don't always know or don't always fully understand how they're being used. Before I worked at Ars, I lived in Germany for 2 years. I lived in Bonn, Germany, which is near Cologne in the western part of Germany. And I was working for Deutsche Welle English, which is the English language service of the German public radio broadcaster. And there I spent a lot of time writing a lot about European science technology issues, particularly privacy. And some of you may know that Germans care quite a lot about privacy. And in fact, I arrived in Germany in the spring of 2010 at a time when Google Street View had just arrived in Germany. And I don't know how many of you guys use Google Street View, if you've used it to show if you used it to show your friends your house, your neighborhood, or whatever. Germans did not like Google Street View when it first turned up there, because Germans sort of, I think, had a big sense of distrust over a foreign company coming in, driving around their cities, taking pictures of everything, and they didn't bother, to a German perspective, a lot of people felt, well, hey, you didn't ask us for this, you didn't ask if we wanted it, you didn't ask our permission, this kind of creeps us out a little bit. And you had German politicians, the foreign minister, the chancellor, different people, saying, oh, we're going to do everything we can to stop this. We really don't want this. And it was really kind of interesting. And so I started trying to figure out, well, what is it about Germans or a lot of Germans that make them more skeptical of this kind of thing? And I came to realize that in Germany, a lot of people, I think most people, inherently trust their own government in the wake of World War II, trust their government more than they trust companies, particularly foreign companies. And I think and that's sort of the default setting, I think, for most people. And in the US, I think it's kind of the opposite, right? We generally allow Facebook, Google, other companies much more leeway. I think, Zuckerberg being before Congress is a good example of that. But we're much more skeptical of government power. We're much more skeptical of how the government does policing, uses technologies. We're afraid of the kinds of power that the government can wield. And I think often, maybe not always, but often for good reason. The founding of our founding myth is based on the idea that the foreign, king exerted too much power over us, and we overthrew that. That's the story we tell ourselves.
It's interesting because in the book, Cyrus writes about how you started as a professional reporter in 2004, and you were dazzled by the technology. And now I hear you saying, yeah, you're still dazzled by the technology, but it's very disconcerting.
It is disconcerting, yeah. It's true. I mean, so I started as a reporter. My first, I think, paid journalism gig was in the fall of 2004. I was a graduate student at Columbia University. I was writing for Wired and the New York Times. And if you go back and you look at a lot of my stories, you know, the critique I would give myself is they were very uncritical of a lot of the, I wrote about some of the, and you can see, or at least I see in my work at that time, kind of the beginning of interest in this topic. I wrote in that time about a technology that is in use in the Bay Area. I'm not sure if it's in use out here, called ShotSpotter. It's a series of microphones that this company, ShotSpotter, places in neighborhoods where they believe there's going to be gun violence.
And we have that here.
Okay, so at least in the Bay Area, I'm not sure about here, but at least in the Bay Area, it's a Bay Area company, it's kind of controversial because a lot of people say that it's very invasive, that not only does it capture gunshots, which people obviously want gunshots to be reported, but I think a lot of people are also concerned that it can capture people's conversation. They're microphones, after all. And so I think people are concerned that particularly, that information is being kind of wantonly handed over to the authorities. And so I wrote about that, and if you read that story, and it's on the New York Times, you can go find it, but there's no mention of like, hey, wait a second. Like there's no like, it's just like, hey, this is cool. I also wrote a similar story about license plate readers.
Yeah, I gotta ask you about this because
Sure.
back in 2013, and I want you to set this up properly too, because you decided to look at what police knew about you.
Yeah.
You had a great relationship with police, no arrests, no problems, just a guy going about his life in Oakland, California.
I think so, yeah.
So what did you find when you tried to get this information about what they knew about you?
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, license plate readers, I would be surprised if they're not in use here in Milwaukee. You can tell me if they are or not, but I would bet. What they look like, so next time you see a patrol car go by, whether it's a county sheriff, a city police, or any whatever city you're in, just take a look at the next time you see a police car. In front of the light bar on the top of the police car is a little camera. It's like a little black rectangle. It's about this big. And what that camera does is it scans license plates at 60 plates per second. They're in use in Oakland. They're in use in my hometown in Santa Monica, California, population 100,000 people. The FBI uses them. The New York Police Department uses them. Chicago PD. Lots of law enforcement all over the country use them. They capture at 60 plates per second, which is like an astonishingly fast number. So if a police car was driving out right outside this building, it would capture parked cars in both directions, moving cars in any orientation, and it's just capturing, just one after the other. And it's capturing these into a database, and it's comparing, the computer in the police car is comparing those captured plates, unknown plates, to what police often call a hot list, so cars that are wanted or stolen. And again, that's great. Like, who doesn't want to get your car back if it's stolen, right? That sounds perfect. The problem is that in a lot of places, there's disagreement as to how long that data can be stored. So do the police keep it do they just scan and check it against their hot list? And if you're a law-abiding citizen, do they then delete it? Usually not. Do they keep it for a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years, 10 years? Is there no limit as to how long they can keep it? And so when I first learned about this technology, you were saying back in 2012, 2013, I'd read about it, I think, in use in Massachusetts, and then I started to realize, oh no, this isn't just in big cities. This is like almost everywhere in America, and in Canada and in Europe, in lots of places. And it's in use in where I live, in Oakland. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder if the Oakland Police Department has times that they have captured my license plate. And so I did what any of you guys sitting here can do. You can file a public records request. You don't have to be a journalist. Anybody can do it. You could file a public records request to your local government agency and say, hey, here's my name, here's my plate number. Please give me the records of the times that you've scanned my car. And the Oakland Police Department was like, here you go. Here are the 15 times in the last year that we've scanned you. And it was kind of interesting. I was in the north part of town, and I was downtown, and I was at my house, and I was, different places. And I was like, that's really curious. Like, and I was trying to think, I was like, what law enforcement purpose does it serve for the police to still have data of my car from 2 years ago? What, like you said, I've never been arrested. I don't have a criminal record. As far as I know, I'm not suspected of anything. As far as I know, I'm not under investigation. Why should they continue to hold this data? And I don't fault the Oakland police for keeping the data. I really just think that nobody thought about it. It's like, for anybody who uses Gmail, right? Gmail has an archive function, and a lot of us, myself included, just kind of reflexively say, yeah, I'll just save this email, just because storage is essentially infinite, right? So the police do the same thing, right? They just keep the scans just because. And so you might think, well, okay, maybe I don't want the police to know that I parked in front of a marijuana clinic, or I went to church, or I went to a gun store, or I went to a mosque, or I went to a gay bar, or there's lots of lawful activity that we all engage in that you might not necessarily want your police department to know or to have a record of, And then later on, I expanded that public records request to not only ask the Oakland Police Department for records about myself, but I also asked the Oakland Police Department to provide all of the license plates that they had ever scanned. And they gave them to me. Yeah, you can go read about it on Ars Technica. They gave me 4.6 million records. I'm not even kidding. This was 20 spreadsheets of hundreds of thousands of lines each that took a few weeks for them to get to me. And we created a database, and I was able to punch in any license plate and see where it had been during that time.
So you could see whatever you wanted,
Yeah.
what other people were doing.
Yeah. I interviewed an Oakland City councilman, and I said, Councilman, what is your license plate number? And he gave it to me. And I said, oh, I think you live on this street because I could see your car has been scanned about 20 times on this one particular block. And he was like, yeah, that's where I live. I was like, that's interesting.
But this goes back to what you were saying earlier. Don't you think a lot of people in this room, people elsewhere, just say, well, if I haven't done anything wrong, who cares?
Sure.
Who cares? It's the cost of, it's transactional.
Totally.
It's the cost of doing business.
Yeah.
I get certain benefits from our technology, and then there are certain things that happen. And
yeah, and I think that's a very common and very understandable kind of instinctive reaction to have. I think, though, that once you see it on the scale of what it means when the government, the well-meaning Oakland Police Department has these records for such a long period of time, it's very easy to develop a pattern, an understanding of what other kinds of information can be extrapolated from there. So if you can see that, in the case of this council member, oh, he's parked in front of his house at night, right? Maybe another night he's parked somewhere else. That might raise some questions. Maybe he's parked, maybe during business hours, you'd expect his car to be parked in front of City Hall. Maybe it's parked in front of, I don't know, the Oakland A's Coliseum or something. You can start to, and that's just license plates, right? So the entire, and I don't mean to get super paranoid with you for all of a second, not too much anyway, but that's kind of the same argument, I would say, as the National Security Agency made with respect to the metadata program that Edward Snowden exposed, right? So the metadata program was all of our call records, not what I said to you on the phone, but the fact that I called you on this day at this time. And if you look at a long enough call log, similarly, you can start to develop a theory of who people are calling and what they're doing, right? A woman who calls a relative and then calls an abortion clinic, you might be able to develop a narrative as to what this woman is talking about, even if you don't hear the actual conversation. So I think for a lot of us, that's very troubling. Once you start to kind of pull back and see, it's not just you and me that have our records there, and it's not just criminal suspects that have their records there, it's all of us. And I think that for the most part, our government officials, however well-meaning they might be, by and large, are ignorant of this. And I think the police are largely ignorant of this. They're largely unaware of what that means when they collect so much data all the time, and they keep it for months or years on end, and they just have it.
We'll talk about some other examples of this surveillance technology that is part of our world today, but I thought it'd be helpful to talk about privacy and our protections. This is a really interesting topic, given the rapid change in technology.
Yeah.
Are the laws that are meant to give us some sense of privacy, are they ill-equipped to deal with the age we live in?
I would say in general, yes, but it's important, I think, and for those of you who are law students or lawyers in the room, you might already appreciate this difference, but I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a law student, although I've kind of become an amateur law student. But one of the things that I didn't...
I think that's more fun than becoming a professional law school student.
But one of the things that I didn't fully appreciate until I undertook this project was, when we talk about privacy and a lot of people sort of feel that they have a right to privacy. That's like a very cool idea that like nobody wants the police peeking in your window without good reason or anything like that. But if you look closely at the Constitution, any of our founding documents, the word privacy does not appear, right? The Fourth Amendment in the Constitution, and apologies to all of you con law students who already know this, right? So if you remember the Fourth Amendment, it protects us, the citizens, from unreasonable searches and seizures. It doesn't say all seizures, it doesn't say all searches, it doesn't say reasonable searches. It says only against unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. That's what the Fourth Amendment protects. It doesn't protect us against Facebook, doesn't protect us against Google. They can do more or less whatever they want. That is what the Fourth Amendment protects. And this is a lot of what my book is about. And so we have to understand then, okay, that's what we're protected against. But what does it mean to be a search? And what is a reasonable search? What is not a reasonable search? So license plate readers, for example, under the law currently, are not considered a search. In the same way that if the police kick down your door and rummage through your house, that is for sure a search. The police can't do that in most circumstances without a warrant that's signed by a judge. But the police can, currently, scan your car as it drives down the street, can capture your phone metadata without a warrant. And I would argue that in a lot of ways, that's more invasive than what they can do by just looking through your house. And in fact, in looking through your house, if I'm suspected of stealing washing machines off of a truck, and a police officer gets a warrant to search my house because they think I've stolen washing machines, they can only, under the law, as I understand it, and all of you smart lawyers in the room can correct me on this, they can't go searching in my house in places where a washing machine would not fit, right? They can only search in places that the thing that they're looking for, or the thing that they have reason to believe I have, they can't go opening my sock drawer because a washing machine's obviously not going to fit in there. And when we get, and this, is getting into slightly more esoteric territory, is like, once you get into the concept of digital searches, right? Searching a computer, a phone, right? What does that mean? There's this idea in the law called plain view, right? So if the police do have a warrant to come into your house and they're searching for drugs or whatever, and they also see that you have a gun on the table that's in plain view, that's fair game. That's not a big deal, right? But if they seize my computer and they're looking for child porn or evidence of drug trafficking or something, and then they also find something else on my computer, what does that mean? Like, what does plain view mean on a digital device? And there are lots of legal scholars who are wrestling with this very idea.
So I think you even say this in the book, but it sounds like what you're saying is that that what's happening here is that many aspects of privacy become obsolete because of the technology. Is that accurate?
In some sense, yes, because I think unless I do ride my bike a lot in Oakland, but unless I give up my car, I can't. It's impossible for me to evade having my plate captured by the police. Unless I move to a cabin and I just walk and ride my bike everywhere, I can't avoid it. It's impossible. So. And soon, today we're talking about license plate readers. Right now, I know in Oakland, again, my knowledge of Milwaukee police practices is very limited, so I apologize, but in a lot of cities in America, police have body cameras. All Oakland patrol officers currently wear body cameras, and this is becoming increasingly common in America. Very soon, those body cameras will have facial recognition capabilities, right? And so imagine a world in the next 5 years, I would say, where those cameras, instead of just capturing video and sound, can capture people's faces. And guess what? The government already has a database of our faces. It's at the DMV, right? It's at the Department of State. If you have a passport or a driver's license, the government already knows what you look like. They already have a very good picture of you. Maybe you're smiling or not. And that has a lot of other information that's attached to it, your name, your address, other things. So it would just as right now, police scan plates to see if they've been stolen or not. You could imagine an officer walking down the street, scanning people, checking to see if there's an outstanding warrant or a criminal or whatever. And again, maybe you say, well, I'm not a criminal, I don't care. But to me, it's a little bit disturbing, the idea that there's now, or there potentially could be, a record of the fact that I, ditched work to go to a ball game or something.
You talked about license plate readers, and I want to talk about something that affects everybody in this room. Probably everyone in this room has a cell phone.
Sure.
They use their cell phone. The way we understand the law today, can government ask for the information on our cell phone without a warrant? Can they do that without a warrant?
As of very recently, no. But that's only because of a court case that I write about in the book that's called Riley that comes from California. It involves a suspected gang member in San Diego. And what the Supreme Court in the end ruled was that incident to arrest, when you're being arrested, the police cannot search your phone without a warrant. I think to me, and maybe to many of you in this room, that might seem obvious, just in the same way that they can't search your house unless they have a warrant in most cases. What the government argued at the time was that searching your phone is just like searching your pockets or your jacket, right? The police can pat you down and can open your pockets and can show you have to, or oftentimes they can make you prove that you don't have any weapons on them, that you're not going to harm the officer in any way with something that you're carrying. But your phone, unless you're going to smash it in somebody's face, probably doesn't have anything that's immediately physically dangerous, right? Mm-hmm. But that case was specific to incident to arrest. But that's generally assumed to mean that, yeah, the police can't force you to open your phone. Then once you, again, this rabbit hole never ends. Then once you get into the question of, well, what if the police come to you and say, hey, Mike, we have this phone. We think that your fingerprint might unlock it. Or we think you know the password to unlock this phone. Will you open it for us? And that, again, is a questionable, I talked about the Fourth Amendment a moment ago. That's starting to get into Fifth Amendment territory, right? If you've watched any police movies or TV shows, right, you have the right to remain silent, all that stuff. That's the Fifth Amendment, right? You have the right to not self-incriminate. But it's different if, for example, it is something that you know, like a password or a passcode, versus something that you are, like your fingerprint, right? If the police, they cannot force you to give up something that you know, but they can, the legal theory says, just like they can ask you to give a handwriting sample or a DNA sample or a blood sample, you probably also can be compelled to give a fingerprint sample to try to unlock a phone. But you might not be able to if it's a written passcode.
The whole phone issue became...
It's very weird.
And it also became really big after the San Bernardino terrorist attack of a few years ago. 14 people killed, 20-some wounded, as I recall. And here you had the government saying to the maker of the iPhone, Apple, you got to help us unlock this phone because there may be vital information on this guy's phone. We need to know. You need to help us. That was really sort of a turning point in this whole discussion, wasn't it?
Absolutely. That's a perfectly accurate description of that. So when that, and it's important to remember this was a court case, but it wasn't a trial. Basically, what had happened was the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles went to a magistrate judge, and again, I apologize to the lawyers and law students in the room for going over information that I didn't know when I started all of this. Within the federal court system, there are different levels of judges. The lowest level of federal judges, lawyers tell me I shouldn't say the lowest level, but it is the lowest level, is a magistrate judge. I sort of think of them as Judge Light, in a sense. They're judges, yes, but they don't have all of the powers of what are commonly called a Title III judge, right? So federal judges are appointed by the president, and they have terms for life. Magistrate judges are then appointed by those district judges, right? So this is just kind of the base level of federal judge. Then you have appellate and Supreme Court. So magistrates, right, are signing off on warrants, doing basic workaday stuff in this is federal court I'm talking about. And so what happened in the San Bernardino case was the U.S. Attorney's Office went to a magistrate judge in Riverside, California, just east of Los Angeles, and they said, hey, we want you, judge, to order Apple to re-engineer its software such that it will eliminate the 10 passcode lockout. For those of you who have an iPhone, maybe you have this feature turned on already. I do. That if you punch in your passcode 10 times incorrectly, the phone will auto-delete itself, right? That sounds great. If you get your phone stolen, you don't want anybody going through and finding all the photos of your kids on there or whatever. So that's what they did. So they got a judge to sign, a magistrate judge to sign off on Apple to re-engineer its software for the purposes of this phone to get into this terrorist who died in San Bernardino. And Apple was like, hold on a second. That's going way too far than what we think the law allows. We want to help, and Tim Cook, later the CEO of Apple, right, he wrote like a long letter, and he said, look, we don't make this decision lightly. We don't refuse government orders lightly. And Apple has helped the government before. This isn't like that Apple is just some rogue actor. They said, look, what you're asking us to do, we have the ability to do it. It'll take us a team of engineers 2 weeks to do. But we think this is going too far. We think that, I sort of call this the if you give a mouse a cookie argument. For those of you who remember that kid's book, right? If you give a mouse a cookie, it'll want a glass of milk. After the glass of milk, it'll want something else and something else and something else. That's what the government, and that's what Apple argued in court against the government. They said, look, if we do this now, you'll come back to us again later for something else and something else and something else. And if it's not to us, it'll be against Amazon or Facebook or Google or anybody else. And we think that's too much. We don't want to be the government's agent. And the government said, no. We have exhausted. We've looked up and down in the archives of the FBI. We cannot, by any other means, open this phone. And then the day before the hearing was supposed to happen, where they were going to hash this all out in court in Riverside, I was in Riverside. I had come down from Oakland. I was really excited to go watch this legal fight play out in court. And then I find out on Twitter that the government has just very suddenly called off the whole thing, which is very disappointing for me. So they called it off because they said, oh, at the last minute, we did find that a company, we don't know who, the government hasn't said, a company has told us that they can get into this phone, and so we're going to just drop the whole thing. That was it. And still now, 2 years later, we don't know what, if any, information the government got off the phone. We don't know what company did it. We think it might be a company called Cellbrite, which currently does a lot of what are called digital forensics for the government. We don't know if it's Cellbrite or not. Based on what now former FBI Director James Comey said at a conference a year or so ago, we think that the FBI may have paid upwards of $1 million to get into this phone, to pay this contractor. We don't know precisely how much. And also, as of like very recently, like within the last few weeks, I wrote about this on Ars Technica. The FBI, when it swore up and down that it couldn't get into this phone, it turned out that they hadn't really done a lot of checking between their own internal divisions. So like one division did know of a way or thought they knew of a way, and the other one didn't. And so when James Comey went before Congress and was like, yep, we totally don't know how to get into this phone, that's what he knew to be true at the time, but he didn't have all the information. And so the Inspector General, the sort of internal watchdog of the FBI, came out with this big report, and they said, you know, the FBI really could have done a better job of talking with its own people to figure out, you know, before they gave this whole big legal showdown. And so the legal question of whether or not the government can do this is still unresolved. We still don't know the answer. So it could be well possible that any time now, there could be another case like this. You may remember there was the tragic shooting in Sutherland Springs, Texas, not too long ago. In that case, an FBI official also there said, hey, we have a phone, we can't get into it. And you know, there was no legal battle that I'm aware of that resulted from that. Maybe they got into the guy's phone, I don't know. But this question of, and the FBI and the DOJ in general have made a very public show of, they call this the going dark problem. They say that you know, this is a really big deal for law enforcement. And you can understand, if it's your job to be an FBI agent, if it's your job to be a police officer, to solve crimes, of course you want to get access to stuff. Of course you want to be able to, you know, get the evidence that you need to put bad guys away. But what a lot of companies, particularly Apple, are concerned with is that if they're asked to be the government's agent, then that weakens privacy for all of us.
They've become a lot more concerned about privacy and security, though, since the Edward Snowden revelations, haven't they?
I think a lot of companies have.
You know, when Snowden came out and said, look, the National Security Agency is collecting just reams and reams of data about our phone calls, that's really made them more concerned, that these larger companies, the Apples and the Googles and Microsoft.
Yeah, I think it made a lot of companies more concerned. Excuse me. I think it made a lot of companies more concerned. I think it made a lot of companies really sort of sit up and take notice of, well, okay, what are we doing and what is our responsibility? How far will we go to help the government or not? What will we do? What should we do? Do we want to, a lot of companies now put out, and they didn't do this before Snowden, they put out what are called transparency reports. You can go you can look for the Google one, the Facebook one, there's like an Instagram one, I think. Lots of companies put out maybe annual or semi-annual reports where they say, okay, we got 400 requests from American government agencies. We complied with 80% of them. We got 12 requests from Dutch authorities, and we got 5 requests from Australian authorities or whatever. And there's like a long list that you can go look at, and that's all the information that we have. That's better than nothing, but still it's like we don't know, okay, did that result in however many people getting prosecuted or convicted or whatever? We don't know. I think companies are really trying to wrestle with how they should play this out. Because on the one hand, they don't want to, I think, oppose the government if they don't have to, but on the other hand, I think a lot of us are very concerned about keeping our devices safe, our data safe, digital tools to use on Facebook or Google or wherever have actually gotten a lot better since Snowden. When Snowden, I don't know how much you guys remember, when Snowden was first contacting Glenn Greenwald, the reporter from The Guardian, that's right. He tried to reach out to him through an encrypted email protocol called PGP, which any of you who have tried to use it, myself included, know it's very difficult to use. I have taught people how to use PGP, but it literally takes hours. It's very frustrating. It's difficult to use on your phone. There is now an app that you can download for Android and for iPhone that's called Signal. I would recommend that everybody download it. It's a very easy, I can teach anybody to use Signal in 5 minutes. It's an encrypted messaging app. It's ephemeral, which means you can set the messages to auto-delete after 5 seconds, a day, whatever time frame you want. You can make encrypted voice calls that don't show up on your call logs so that the NSA can see them if you're worried about that. You can do encrypted video calls. It works really well. And that's so the tools have gotten better, is my point, is that they've come a long way. And a lot of companies are trying to figure out, how do we make secure communications easier for people to use? Because it can be it has been very frustrating.
I want to talk about Mark Zuckerberg and
Sure.
Facebook in a moment,
Sure.
and also about what people can do, what government can do, how do we address some of these concerns about privacy. But I guess my bottom line here is as we look at the future, you talk about in the book all these different surveillance technologies that exist. I mean, you mentioned facial recognition, drones, thermal imaging. They're all these.
When you combine them, right?
Combine them.
Yeah.
But a fair number of these things happened after 9/11.
Sure.
And it was the concern about terrorism.
Sure.
And yet, from your book, it seems like what's happened is that some of these practices are still in effect, and they really don't deal that much with terrorism anymore. They're
Right.
law enforcement strategies to bust drug dealers.
Right.
They've been used in a way that perhaps they weren't originally intended.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that a lot of people, because this gets into the kind of nitty-gritty of how the bureaucracy of government works, how logistically all of this stuff works. But yeah, like license plate readers, stingrays, they're also known as cell site simulators. These are fake cell towers that are in use by police all over the country that basically make a phone into, instead of connecting to an AT&T tower, it's connecting to the police's fake tower. And what that does is it allows the police to know where you are. Because if they know where your phone is, chances are they know where you are. And that's being used all over the place too. A lot of these agencies, when they acquire these technologies, a lot of them are not using city money to do it. It's not like the police chief comes before the city council and says, hey, we want to buy 10 drones and 5 stingrays and a fleet of license plate readers and some facial recognition body cameras, and can you give us $10 million to get all that stuff? Because we really want to bust all the bad guys in town. They don't do that. Right. Typically what they do is they get grants from the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice, and typically they're attached to terrorism things. So if you actually go and read what they say, the justifications for why they need these devices, by and large, they say, well, Milwaukee is really under threat from terrorism, and we really got to protect against, all the terror suspects that are running around town, and so we really need, some more drones or whatever, and we really need this stuff. And Department of Homeland Security is like, yeah, we don't like terrorists either, so here you go. Here's $500,000, here's $5 million, whatever. And then, guess what? There's not a lot of terror suspects around. There's some, but there's not a lot. There's a lot more drug dealers and kind of lower level criminals. So the police have all this stuff. And again, it's if you are a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So like, if you're the police and your job is to catch bad guys and you have all these tools in your back closet, of course you're going to use them. So, what a tool that was originally developed, the Stingray was originally developed as like battlefield surveillance technology for the US military. And now it's used, like, no joke, to bust a guy who stole $50 of chicken wings in Baltimore one time.
That's a real story.
That's a real story. Like, that doesn't happen a lot, but that's like an extreme example, I understand. But like, they're not, a lot of these technologies, by and large, are not being used to go after terror suspects. I write about in the book a little bit about a city north of San Francisco in Marin County, a city called Tiburon. It's a very rich city, very small city. It's on a peninsula, so there's only 2 roads going in and out of town. And they've put stationary, I was talking about license plate readers that are usually on police cars. There's also stationary license plate readers, so they can mount them. They look like, maybe just a traffic camera or something like that. You wouldn't know if you saw it that it's necessarily a license plate camera. And on the application, they say, we want to protect against terrorism. How many terrorist attacks have there been in Marin County? 0. How many terror suspects have been arrested in Marin County? 0.
It's working.
Yeah. So great job, Marin County, I guess.
So if you're concerned about the collection of this data and that so much of what we do and how we behave is being collected and stored, that's one of the critical components of this, being stored. What do we do about that? Is it a legislative solution? Is this better suited for legislative action than it is for the judiciary to take this up?
That's a good question. So when I started writing this book, my first thought was, man, the Supreme Court and the courts in general have really fallen down. They're really behind. They don't get it. They're too old. They don't get it. Us, young folks who really understand this stuff, like we should be, put in charge of this. But I realized by the time it gets to the Supreme Court, it's like years, like it takes so long. Getting from a guy getting arrested to a Supreme Court case often takes several years, maybe a decade or more. So in that time, think about how much better the phone in your pocket has gotten better in the last 5 years. Think about how much better drones have gotten in the last 5 years. The technology is moving way, way too fast for, I think, the Supreme Court to adequately deal with, in my humble opinion. So that's frustrating. What I think people can do, and if you are concerned with these issues, I think the first thing that you can do is try to understand what is in use in your own backyard, in the city where you live, in the county where you live, in the state where you live. File records requests. Like, it sounds dumb and weird and, not and difficult. It's really easy, actually. If you don't know how to do it, go to the website of the police department or the government agency that you think might have the records that you want and say, hi, every state has an open records law. I'm sure there's a Milwaukee statute number that these young lawyers can tell you what the number is. I don't know off the top of my head. But you can find out. You can say, hey, I want to see the purchase records for the license plate readers. I want to know, what is the location of the license plate readers around town? I want to know, do you guys have drones? If you do, what is the policy for the use of these drones? And just kind of asking basic questions, I think, would be a big improvement, number one. Number two, something that we're doing in Oakland, and I write about this in the book also, not to just trumpet Oakland all the time, but one of the things that I think Oakland is doing really well is there is a body in Oakland right now that's called the Oakland Privacy Advisory Commission. It sort of sits in parallel to the city council, and they act as sort of a privacy check on the city. So that instead of, as I said before, when the police chief comes and says, hey, will you accept this free money that we can get from DHS? And usually the city council members are like, oh yeah, free money, that sounds great, we'll totally sign off on that. But typically they don't ask the questions of like, well, what is this for and how is it used and what's the purpose that this serves? What the Privacy Commission tries to do is it tries to act as a first check on the police. And other agencies too, usually it's the police. And the police come, and I've been to a number of these meetings, and they're very friendly and civil and interesting and thoughtful, and you have younger people who are commissioners, you have older people who are commissioners, you have a former police officer on the commission, you have people from all walks of life who are really trying to privacy is hard, and I think it really, I say these things not because I'm like anti-police or I'm anti-FBI or anti-government. I'm just very concerned, and I think that it's hard for all of us to come up with the right balance, and I think doing it locally in your own city, in your own state, is a good way to start. I don't know about you, even no matter your politics, I think it's no secret that Congress is not always a great vehicle for legislative change.
They haven't done anything since 2009 on this
You're
issue.
Right, on this particular issue.
No major legislation since 2009.
Yeah, so that's almost a decade, right?
Yeah.
So it's very difficult for Congress to agree on anything, much less surveillance and privacy.
You said there in the book, though, there are about 10 states, though, that have sort of built on what our understanding of privacy law is today.
Yeah, so there are some states. California is one of them. Again, I apologize for my ignorance on what Wisconsin law is, but in California, the California Constitution does assert an affirmative right to privacy. It actually is in the ungodly long California Constitution. If you go look it up, it's in Article 1, Section 1. It's an affirmative right to privacy. But again, that only affects Californians against the government of California. That doesn't affect Californians against the FBI or whatever. But a lot of states are trying to figure out what is the best way for us to deal with some of these concerns that we have and try to pass state laws that say, oh, for stingrays, you do need a warrant. If you're going to collect data about citizens, if law enforcement, the government is going to collect data about citizens, they need to follow these steps, and maybe you need to have a privacy commission. Maybe you need to have a clear policy that says, okay, we're going to capture the license plate information, but we're definitely going to delete it after a month or whatever, unless there's some good reason not to. And I think slowly we're starting to see some of that trickle up from states and cities around the country. And there are lots of groups, the ACLU, the EFF, there's another group called the 10th Amendment Center or 10th Amendment, I may be getting the name wrong, but these are people who, believe that the states should be the laboratory of democracy, and if you do care about these issues, then you can lobby your state government to ensure that you will have those protections as a citizen in a way that maybe you don't at the federal level for now.
We'll take a couple of audience questions here in a moment.
Sure.
Before we do that, Mark Zuckerberg's appearance on Capitol Hill. So you were live tweeting about his appearance.
I tweet a lot. I tweet too much. I'm sorry.
Okay, so don't we all? Yeah.
I know.
So your takeaway from that, should anybody have been shocked that Facebook was not protecting our personal data? I mean, people say, oh my, we can't believe this is happening.
Yeah.
Really? Should anybody
Well,
be shocked
and that's the
by
thing
that?
is, like, so I spent a lot of time talking with privacy law professors, with other people who know this stuff way better than I do. And a lot of people were saying, that they were shocked that there was gambling in the establishment, right? But it's interesting. I feel like this moment, watching Zuckerberg, I don't know how many of you guys caught even a clip of the testimony, but it was interesting to me. I had the reaction of him probably saying to himself, how come I haven't been here before? How come I wasn't here 5 years ago?
Why did it take him so long?
Why did it take him so long, right? Where have they been this whole time? And I think that I was talking with a friend about this earlier, that I think we're in kind of a moment now where, like, you have the kind of nexus of Russian meddling and the election and Trump and all of those things kind of colliding into this one thing where people are now starting, and also, like, 87 million people is a really big number. That's almost a third of the American population.
If that's the number.
If that's the number, right? And it had been going up. It was 50 million, now it's 87 million. Who knows, right? But I think the testimony with Zuckerberg shows that people do care, but I think a lot of us are really, I know I'm really torn about it, right? Like, I use Facebook, probably a lot of you do too. I don't like the idea of, like, my data being sold, and and this is the other thing, is that Zuckerberg, swore up and down. They said, look, we don't sell anybody's data. And I think one of the senators had a great comeback, which was, yeah, but you rent it, which is, I think, a much better analogy to what they do, because Facebook made $40 billion in revenue last year off of advertising off of us, off of all of us, right? So when you like the Green Bay Packers, or you like the Oakland A's, or you like chocolate ice cream, right, then you get ads, and you've probably noticed that those correlate with what you say and what you do on Facebook and Google and every other platform. This is how these companies make money. And, you know, but at the same time, they're useful, right? Like, we all, you know, I like knowing what my friends across the country and across the world are doing. I like seeing pictures that I wouldn't get to see otherwise. I like feeling like I have a connection with people, but at the same time, I get creeped out by, you know, advertisements for, you know, suit jackets or whatever, you know? I don't think I've ever searched for suit jackets, but I don't usually wear this. But you know what I'm saying? Like they serve a purpose, right? Facebook would not exist if people didn't like it. There are 2 billion people in the world, so that's what, a third of the world's population that's insane, that's crazy. We've never had a situation like that before. And in some ways, you know, Facebook, you know, regardless of what the Senate or the Congress decide to do with Facebook in the US, that's only in the US, right? That has nothing to do with anybody else anywhere else in the world, right?
So does this do any long-term damage to Facebook or to Mark Zuckerberg, who was rumored to be a presidential candidate only about 6 months ago?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't know that we know yet. I don't think the senators in that room knew that. I mean, I think.
What did you think of the questioning incident, Lee? That was the subject of a lot of tweets about people were not impressed with the depth of knowledge.
Yeah, a lot of the senators. I was joking with somebody. I didn't actually check this, but I would bet that the median age of the senators is probably twice of Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg is 33 years old. I'm 36. I would bet that the median age of the senators in that room was double his age. A handful of the senators seemed to know a little bit. I thought Lindsey Graham did a pretty good job of questioning, but some of the senators, it seemed clear, were just reading words off of a page, but they didn't really know what those words meant. And because of the format of that questioning, I thought it was very difficult to get like a really substantive discussion with him about what they were doing and how they were doing it, because they had this hard 5-minute time limit. My favorite moment in the whole, I didn't watch the second day, I watched most of the first day, was when he was being questioned by Orrin Hatch, a Republican from Utah. And Orrin Hatch said, how do you make money if nobody's paying for your service? And Zuckerberg kind of looked at him and he's like, Senator, we run ads. And that, you know, and I think that really distilled in one sentence the lack of knowledge on many of the senators in the room. But I would like to see more of that. I would like to see more tech executives be brought to the halls of power, maybe instead of with the senators themselves, maybe with staffers, maybe with activist groups, maybe with privacy groups, maybe with law students. I mean, who knows? Like, just having more opportunities to really engage with them, I think could be useful.
Do you think there's any reason why there hasn't been legislation? I mean, part of it may be that this subject matter is not as, that some of the legislators are not as comfortable with the subject matter, but part of it is the tech companies, the tech giants are spending a lot of money on lobbying now. They used to sort of have disdain for that. Now a lot of money out there.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you're, they're spending a lot of money on lobbying, both locally and nationally. And then separately from all of that is the whole question of, moving money around the world, avoiding taxes, reducing their taxes and so forth. That's a whole separate issue. But yeah, I think that it's very clear that the federal government, as it stands right now, I think doesn't have a clear understanding of what, if anything, they can or should do. If you have a strong opinion, I would strongly encourage you to, write your congressman, as they say. Well, I guess your congressman is leaving, or depending on what district you're in. But anyway, I did read the paper this morning. I think that it will be really interesting to see if they can, I thought it was very interesting. One of the senators said to Zuckerberg, they said, "Hey, will you give us suggestions for regulations that you want?" And he was like, "Okay."
Wow, this is great.
I thought that was weird. I mean, I was trying to think of, has there been other instances, have tobacco executives come before the Congress and said, "Hey, will you, tobacco industry, or you financial executives, give us regulations that you like?" I don't think it usually works like that.
I don't know. I don't know. Let's take a few questions. Please raise your hand. If you're in the seating bowl, press down on that little device right there. Just keep your finger down on that. We'll be able to hear your question. We'll start right there.
My concern is that the people who can make the laws may not be fully briefed on how to do it in the best way. And many of the people who are most affected, particularly young people, have no expectation of privacy, nor do they feel any need for privacy. So looking at it from my own personal view, I have things like DuckDuckGo, MeWe, that kind of thing.
DuckDuckGo users. How many DuckDuckGo users in the house? Woo! Go look it up later. DuckDuckGo, you'll find what I'm talking about.
So without, like you say, going down the rabbit hole, how do I get educated on the things I can do without using up too much brain space and freaking myself out?
Yeah. I think that, the question was, what can you do to be more conscious of privacy online? Is that roughly right? Okay. Yeah, it's hard. It's really difficult. There are things that there are these terms in InfoSec, information security, that get tossed around. One of them is threat modeling. Threat modeling basically means, who are you afraid of? What is your worst case scenario, right? If your worst case scenario is that your friend down the block knows that you ditched work because you posted a photo on Facebook, that's not a very high threat, right? That's not a big deal. Maybe, hopefully not. Are you worried? Are you genuinely worried that you're being targeted by your police department, by the FBI, by the NSA? Then it's much more serious, right? You might have to ditch all of your accounts and ditch all of your devices and everything, and that's a much higher bar. And obviously, there's a huge spectrum in between that. Are you worried about just random internet miscreants stealing your data, stealing your credit card number, or getting into your email or whatever? If that's what you're worried about, we all should be worried about that. Take advantage of basic tools that exist, and it sounds like you do take advantage of a lot of them. Two-factor authentication on email, using physical tokens. Google offers this, Facebook offers this, that not only do you have a login and password, but you also have to insert a physical USB key. It literally looks like a key, and you put it into your computer to be able to access your account. The specific one I'm thinking of is called YubiKey, Y-U-B-I key. It's like a $20 USB key. It's about this big. I have one. But it's really hard, and the threats are always changing. The tools are always changing. It's very difficult to stay on top of these things. Without being glib, I would say read the website I work for, Ars Technica, because we try to stay abreast. We try to cover these things as best as we can. But it's the real answer is it's not like go download this and that app and then you're done. It's a constant struggle, and it's frustrating. And I feel like that's not a very good answer, but I feel like that's the most honest answer I can give. Really, is that it depends on if you're concerned that Google is tracking you and whatever, then yeah, use DuckDuckGo. If you're concerned that the Milwaukee police is scanning your license plates, then you might have to ride your bike everywhere, and that's the price you pay. And I hate to say it, but that's true, And so it depends kind of how paranoid you are against who, and when and why. And that's a calculation that we all have to make for ourselves. And that's very difficult. At least it's difficult for me.
I wanted to mention that if you're in the back and you have a question, just raise your hand. We'll go there, and you can use the microphone Ryan has.
Hi, I'm from the ACLU of Wisconsin.
Cool.
And we have written, and so are my coworkers here, we have written some of those open records requests, so we know that the Milwaukee Police Department is using Stingray, Cellbrite, and in fact used automatic license plate readers for over 2 years before they had a policy governing how long they were keeping our data. So I do want to just mention, because I assume a lot of folks in this room are here from Milwaukee, that you can call your Common Council member, because they have a policy in front of them that would require them to review the surveillance technology that the police department is purchasing before it is purchased, and to develop policies governing the use of all of that data.
That's awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Other questions? Raise your hand. I'm going to go there, and then I'll come over here, okay? Yes, sir. Use the microphone if you would.
Oh, thank you. On a global scale, I think that there's a reasonable case to make that the Europeans are good ways ahead of the United States in figuring out ways to legislate privacy protection. But on the other end of the scale, there's the Chinese, who I think have at least as good of surveillance technology as the United States, but where the government is actively engaged in expanding surveillance to the maximum extent possible. In terms of global politics, where do you see this going?
I think China, unfortunately, from what I know, and I'll be honest, my knowledge of China is about as good as yours. I read about it in the news as much as I can. I've never been to China. I don't know, I don't have any particular insider knowledge as to what is going on in China. But I do know, I've read reports recently, maybe you've read some of them too, that yeah, the police in China already are using facial recognition technology for commonly on the street. And I think that it's, you know, it's kind of a trope in some circles, some privacy circles, that if you want to know what the future of the surveillance dystopia is, go look at what China's doing. And hopefully, I would like to believe that in this country we have things like the Constitution and our state legislators and our local legislators that hopefully, if we push them nicely and gently enough, might go in the right direction, or at least the direction that we would hope that they would go. In China, being not quite as much of a democracy is I think a little bit more difficult. And I think people there, now there's been generation after generation of people who've grown up in that system who I think for a lot of people, they don't know any different. They don't know that, maybe you should be skeptical, or maybe you are skeptical, or even if you are, that you don't have a vehicle to express that skepticism necessarily. So I think it's very concerning what authoritarian regimes are doing. And there are companies both in the US and in Europe and other places that are working with regimes like China and other countries to conduct surveillance on their own citizens. And a lot of times they don't, we don't know about it, they don't know about it. It's done in secret. And I think that's very troubling. I'm a pretty optimistic person in general, so I would like to believe that, if we push hard enough that we can get where we want to go. I would like to believe that we're not going to be a Chinese surveillance dystopia. I really hope not. but it takes folks like from ACLU and other organizations and citizens, coming here and learning about these issues, to me is like, shows that there are people that do care about these issues, that want to find out what tools they can use, how they can improve their community, and that's great, the rabbit hole is very wide, so there's room for all of you.
Let me take one final question over here. Yes, sir. Yeah, just hold it down if you would.
There we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, you spent a couple of years in Germany, and I hear that in a month or so a new policy is coming into effect governing all these internet companies. Is that a model that our Congress should consider? Have you had a chance to look at it?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I believe the gentleman was referring to a new privacy regulation that's called the GDPR, which I think is the General Directive in Privacy Regulation, something like that. The GDPR is going into effect at the end of next month in the European Union. And that affects American companies and also European companies as to how they deal with people's privacy. It's believed to be one of the strongest privacy regulations in the world right now. Again, governing, and when we talk about privacy, as I was saying earlier, right, you have to kind of bifurcate that into kind of stuff the government does and stuff the private company does. This is regulating what private companies do, which is great. Mark Zuckerberg, not to hammer on him too much, but he was on a call with reporters last week. I was on that call, as were a number of other reporters, where he said that he would extend GDPR protections even to Americans and would extend them globally. We'll see exactly what that means. It's not clear because there are some differences in terms of like at what age people in the US can give consent, right? So if you look at Instagram and Facebook and a lot of these services, the age of consent for signing up for services online in the US is 13. I believe in Europe it's 16. So there's like some slight variations like that. So we don't know precisely how that's going to affect, and a lot of American companies, I think, are trying to figure out, how does this affect us? What does this mean for how we do business? But this is very much a live issue. And in fact, today, before I came here just this morning, I was writing about this long predates Cambridge Analytica, but there's a separate case that's going on right now out of Ireland, because it turns out that and I was talking about the tax shenanigans and stuff that a lot of these companies are engaged in, Facebook has an entity in Ireland. It's called Facebook Ireland. Facebook Ireland is the hub for all non-American and non-Canadian Facebook users, right? So it's their essentially overseas subsidiary. So when you sign up for Facebook in Germany or in South Africa or in Australia or anywhere else that's outside of North America, if you bother to read the terms of service, it actually says you are signing a contract with Facebook Ireland. And that has a slight benefit because Ireland is a member of the European Union. So everybody, except for us in the US and Canadians, have the benefit of those laws. And so there's currently a case that was brought by an Austrian law student, actually, 5 years ago, that's still going, that is trying to establish whether or not there are adequate privacy protections under the European law if Facebook is using those protections when they're transferring data back to the US headquarters. So the short answer is nobody really knows just yet because the law hasn't come into effect yet, and we don't know precisely what policies these companies are going to implement.
We're going to wrap up the questions right there. Before we go, a couple of pieces of business. We have two more on the issues scheduled for this spring semester. Coming up next week on April 19th, we'll be hearing from Justice Goodwin Liu. Justice Liu is it's California month here.
I was going to say.
Yeah, California State Supreme Court Justice. He's been mentioned, was also nominated for the federal bench at one time. He will be here. He's also part of our Jenkins Moot Court competition. He'll be helping us out later that afternoon, but he'll do an On the Issues session with us at 12:15 on the 19th. And then our final event of the spring semester is with Megan Twohey. That name may or may not ring a bell with you. She is a prize-winning investigative reporter for the New York Times. She did the part of the reporting on the Harvey Weinstein story. So she is really her reporting and some of the other reporting done by the Times has sort of led to this Me Too movement in America. Megan Twohey is in town. She will be coming by here again 12:15 on May 11th. I know that's a tough time. It's exam time. It's wrapping up at exams. We understand that, but that's when she's in town. So if you have an hour and you want to spend it with us, we would love that. So having said that, let me do what I do every time we're together and say thanks. Thanks for your interest, your attention to these kinds of issues and these kinds of conversations. And again, if you're interested in the new book, Habeas Data, Privacy versus Surveillance Tech by the gentleman next to me, Cyrus Farivar, there are copies out in the lobby, and he'll stick around and sign them for you and spend a little time with you. So again, thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.